Now let's talk about who did Godzilla wrong. But let me tell you this, though. When I was a kid, I thought this movie was so good.
I remember you were so amped about this. I'm like,
Brandon and I watched it so many times.
Yeah, and I think I watched it maybe once. I don't even remember.
And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, is the 1998 Roland Emmerich Godzilla American version.
Yep.
But what's great about this movie is it gave us one of the best Godzilla cartoon series ever made.
Yep.
And it totally redeemed itself. Even Godzilla fans today recognize this as a top tier Godzilla show for any audience.
Let's talk about it because we watched it specifically for this.
Yes.
And I had never watched it as a kid. I liked dinosaurs, but I never got into Godzilla as a kid. I'm into Godzilla now.
Yeah.
This show's fun. I watched it.
It's so fun.
I got sick about a month back, so I had the opportunity to just like binge through the whole 40 episodes in
Your
a few
clinic
days.
also flooded, so you also had that.
That's right. So I definitely had a little bit of downtime. And it was one thing I will say. When you're watching a like an episodic TV show back to back, things can get boring because it's like Monster of the Week every 20 minutes. When in reality, so I had to really step away from that for a second and think this was released weekly for us when we were kids. We'd watch it on I don't know what date. Fox Kids.
Saturday mornings.
It was Saturday. Oh, that's right, because we're going to talk about
Fox Kids was incredible.
It was.
You had 90s animated Spider-Man. You had all the good ones.
Yep. It came, that was probably the coziest a kid could be back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. You just sat down, you know what you were getting into. You watched the cool cartoon, the commercials between. That's when commercials were good.
They were great back then.
I want commercials like that.
Because you know why commercials were so good? Because they marketed
to us.
To us.
Yeah.
They're all about toys. They're all about fruit by the foot.
Exactly.
They're all about like candy.
Yep.
You know, they also promoted other TV shows like.
Yes.
And the commercials weren't as long as TV commercials were.
Right.
Because the show was like 20 minutes.
Yep.
And you had to fill like a 2-minute commercial every 5 minutes.
Exactly. So when I was watching it recently, I thought, okay, Monster of the Week, pretend it's a new week. And it totally fixed it. It was every episode. I was like, okay, what are we getting into today?
Yeah.
When is Nigel going to get destroyed and how is it going to happen?
Yeah. Did you, when you first started watching it, like obviously you've never seen it before, but after the first 2 episodes, did you clue in why Nigel was there?
No, at first, I think it took me like 5 or 6 episodes, and I thought, oh, right. He is, what did you say? He's the Kenny of, from South Park of this show.
They made him as a character in mind. They wanted Kenny from South Park to resemble Nigel.
Yep.
So I never watched South Park. I know you did growing up.
Kenny always dies.
Yeah. So they wanted Nigel to die in every episode. And it's so funny. It's so creative how he dies in every episode. And if he doesn't die in the episode, because there's an episode he doesn't appear at all. Yes. They kill him twice. They don't kill him. Because it's rated Y7 for kids 7 and up. So everything is not killed, it's destroyed. So they destroy him more than once to make up for an episode he doesn't get destroyed in.
And Craven's so funny because he's always says, Nigel! Like he's just like, why? He's so surprised every single time.
Yeah. And there's an episode I wrote down. It's in season 2. It's the episode Twister.
Yes.
And so when I was talking to you about this when we were watching the show, that I didn't think I'd seen any of season 2.
Oh, okay.
When this episode showed up, I've seen this episode.
Yeah.
So I've seen it a few times on reruns on TV, but I hadn't seen any other episode of season 2, and we'll get to why.
Oh.
But there's a point in this episode where Nigel dies like 3 times in this episode. So after the first time he gets destroyed, Randy's always messing with Craven.
He's like
Those two back and forth. All the characters of the show are great.
Yeah.
Because Godzilla shows up a little bit in each episode, but when he does, they make the most of it. But because the crew of 5 is so enjoyable and they bounce off each other really well, and the voice cast is great, it really makes for an entertaining show. because the crew is out there doing missions and Godzilla happens to be following him around.
Yeah.
But in this episode, Randy goes, "Come on, Doc, you can fix him, you can rebuild him." And then he goes, "What's the point?" Craven goes, "What's the point?" And in my head, that's just them breaking the fourth wall for us, because for them, it's a joke on how they make the episodes. It's good storytelling. It's like, why would I bother fixing him? But for us, we look forward to him getting destroyed every episode.
Every single time.
You rebuild him for the audience.
Exactly. Oh, that's a good point. I didn't notice that quote in there, but it's totally for us.
Yeah. There's a lot of one in my notes. Like, I have one line per episode of like what I wanted to point out or like kind of remember the episode. And that I had a big portion for that, because I'm like, oh, I do remember watching this episode with the rat making a twister.
Yes.
And
what a wild concept too.
And the end of the episode, there's always a gag how they end the episode, how they start it. And Randy's was trying to win a trip to Jamaica.
Yes.
And you have to be caller 12. And at the end of the episode, he calls again and he doesn't get it. And then Craven ends up getting the thing. So those two back and forth are always at each other in a playful way, but like also Randy's always trying to mess with him.
Yes. They're very much frenemies.
Yeah, they're frenemies. They're best buds by the end, but they're like always against each other. And so the characters in this show, so most of them are from the movie.
Yep.
So we have Nick Totopoulos.
Yep.
But it's also new voice cast, but except for Craven. Craven's actually, who was in the movie, he had like 2-3 lines in the live action movie. He's voicing himself.
No kidding.
Yeah, so they brought him back to do that. And then also the Colonel, he's voicing himself.
Yeah. Cool.
So Nick Totopoulos, he's voiced by, I don't remember his name, but he was Batman. And then Batman, the series, not the 80s Batman, but he was also Spider-Man Unlimited.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So he was doing a lot of stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes.
And I apologize for not remembering his name. Then you have, Monique.
Yep.
Who was the French assassin / CIA agent.
Yep.
And then they wanted to bring in someone for the kids to be relevant to the kids. So that's why they brought in Randy Hernandez, who was a teenager who was going to college, who can bring that jokey side to the group.
Yep.
And that's why they wanted to bring in Monique, because they didn't have a cool female in the movie. They had Elsie. She was in the movie, but she wasn't really anything. And then Audrey, the reporter, she was...
Oh, that's right.
She wasn't really that bright.
No.
So they brought her in to be this kind of badass force to the group.
You're right.
Where you had Craven, Elsie, and Nick being the scientists, and really that kind of group where Randy was the tech guy. He built everything. He hacked in all the software. He was the computer guy.
Yep.
Nick knew he could hack into government stuff, but he brought him on the team because he's such a good asset.
Yes.
So you have this group of misfits always on adventures together. And in 92, when they got the rights to Godzilla, Sony wanted to open up an animation division to really bring their live action into TV form for kids, like Ghostbusters. You had Jackie Chan, you had Men in Black cartoons, Jackie Chan Adventures.
Great.
Amazing show.
Yep.
So you had stuff like that, and then they got the rights to Godzilla. But this is back in the day. For a show like this, they had to shop around the idea of a Godzilla show. Okay. So they sold it to Fox Kids, which nowadays you really make a show for your, like, whatever network you're working for.
Yeah.
But they didn't really have a network because they were their own studio. So they had to shop it to a network. And Fox Kids bought 40 episodes of the show, which was a positive thing for them because that means they got all the money up front.
Yes.
And they could budget properly. So every episode they can budget their money, and they could put the money, as they had their plan of the storyboards, they could put the budget where it needs to be and have money for every episode, rather than like season 2, normally a show would like fall off.
Yeah, probably like that midway point, you'd have like some fillers in there, and then you'd have a big opening and then ending.
Like Spider-Man the Animated Series, the end of season 2.
Yes.
A couple middle parts of season 3. Like one episode, season 4, like they saved the budget for certain episodes, but this, because they got all the money, they could properly make every episode look exactly the same.
And that was what I thought watching it. Everything felt super, super consistent. There wasn't a dip in quality anywhere. The premise of each episode was on a whole similar. It's a monster a week, but they were creative. And there was always, you knew what was going to happen, but there was always something cool and interesting about it.
Mm-hmm. And to do that, to make that possible, they brought on comic book writers to help them condense the story into a 20-minute, because the comic book writers are used to writing a story per issue, like right? You have a long form story, but there's a short form story in a 28-page comic book.
Exactly.
And what's crazy is no one knew the design of Godzilla, even the people making the show.
What?
The design of Godzilla for the movie was so secret. People working on the show, when they started working on it, say 93, to get it ready, the people working on it, when they did storyboards, they would either draw, like they have the scenes and the boards, they would draw a square, a rectangle, or a big triangle, or some guy even drew like a sock puppet with eyes to represent Godzilla, because no one knew what he looked like. They weren't allowed to see what he looked like because it was kept secret. It wasn't until the trailer or like the movie came out that the American crew, because the animation was shopped to Korea, because Sony is a Japanese company, so they did all their work in Korea. And so the crew who worked on it, like the storyboard artists and stuff, who weren't the top tiers of the Sony, like the president, like the boardroom, they didn't know what he looked like until the movie came out.
Wow.
Yeah. And they also didn't know the reception this movie was going to get made, because like a year prior, they were finishing up the show to get it ready to launch in the fall of 98 when the movie came out a couple months prior. So they were really banking on this movie doing well because the show needed to be successful.
It's interesting because they put a lot of faith in the movie design to be translated well to TV, like a cartoon.
They worked hard to make sure they could translate it to cartoon and also keep the aesthetic alive so people knew what it was, and keeping the characters. And to kick off the show, season 1 of this show is basically what the second movie was going to be.
Yeah, okay.
So the second movie was going to be like the episode 1 kicks off with the crew in the military searching for more eggs, because at the end of so Godzilla 98, it's basically like they wanted to capitalize on Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
For sure. And so the end of the movie, Godzilla lays a bunch of eggs in Madison Square Garden.
Yep.
And they obviously had to have that in there because at the time, New York, and they have to have all the monuments.
Yep.
And so they blow up Madison Square Garden. But at the end of the movie, we see one last egg that survived, then it hatches. So this show basically kicks off, which I don't know how they managed to pull this off if they had access to the scripts, because the show kicks off the way the second movie would have started, with Nick Totopoulos and their army crew going down.
Yeah.
But animation they'd have to start all the story process in 93, because animation takes way longer to budget your 40 episodes. So how did they must have known something, because it's crazy. So Nick falls down Madison Square Garden. There's a port where he falls into, and the army's like, "Oh no, Nick," kind of thing. And he slides down into the port where the egg is. And he lands in this gook, and the egg hatches, and all that stuff from the egg goes on top of him. So this baby Godzilla, he imprints on this baby because Nick has the gook all over him that has the scent of the baby. So Nick is now the father to this new Godzilla.
Yeah.
And it just carries from there. And it's called New Family Part 1. And there's 2 parts to this where, the baby ends up getting away into the Hudson River.
Yep.
Right. And then he has his crew where he works on the side of the Hudson. And they're called Heat. They're in charge of basically studying science. He's a worm guy, but in this, he's way more interesting than he was in the movie.
Yeah.
But then they find out they're trying to track down the baby, right? So they're trying to give him fish, like set traps for him. But when they realize he's grown 4 times the size, and they're like, he's not a baby anymore. And so he's attacking them. But then he realized when he picks Nick up that he remembers him.
Right.
So this episode sets up every time Nick goes somewhere. It's not that Godzilla is following him around all the time like he did in like the Hanna-Barbera stuff, where like they called on him, but he was basically anywhere. They made him more like an animal with instincts, and like he has a territory. So Nick is his territory. So he would go wherever is necessary. Yeah. And which is a cool way to do it, because he has a very puppy-like personality.
Yes.
In this show, which makes him more likable because he has different sides. He's animalistic, but he's also, you could see he has a puppy side to him, but then there's different forms of how Godzilla acts.
Because Nick can say something along the lines of, "Don't blow this up," or "Go away," and
he just get back to the water, to the water.
The one thing Godzilla. The one thing I gotta say, I got real tired of hearing him say "go, go, go" in every single episode.
Yeah,
because I was watching it all together.
Yeah,
that and what the two things I waited for to see how Nigel would be destroyed and when Nick would yell "go, go, go" in each episode, because I needed to make like fun of it. It was getting way too much.
We also did watch 40 episodes in like a week.
So exactly. Yeah.
I planned it so that we'd have a month before we talked about this. So I was like, okay, I'm only going to watch 2 episodes a day.
Right.
So it wasn't a lot, or 2 episodes every other day. So I'd plan myself accordingly. But it was a lot if you watch it all at once.
Oh, yeah.
Like we did with Spider-Man. That was a lot.
Oh, that was a haul.
That was a lot. But then you also have to think about it as like it's per week.
Exactly.
But we're not watching it per week. So that's a problem with binging, is sometimes you get tired of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But overall, the show is fun because, well, we should talk about it now. The monsters.
Yeah. The monsters, they didn't have rights to any of the Toho stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And because they didn't know that until like getting ready for production with storyboards and character designs, that they would be locked up. They didn't think.
Surprise.
So they created 60 new monsters for the show.
Unreal.
And they nailed every single one of them.
Yeah.
Except for like maybe 1 or 2. Like there's a couple in season 2. I'm like, I don't need that. Like the manta ray and like the behemoth and stuff.
That one was weird.
The main monsters in season 1, they nailed them all.
Yep, they did. And even the aliens in the
Leviathan episode.
Yeah, that was cool. They had that sort of alien Prometheus vibe going on.
And the problem, I think, with how we watch the show, I have the DVD, so I have all the episodes in the proper order.
Yeah.
But for you, the problem with the show is that they were aired differently than how the episodes were titled.
Yes.
And the studio gave Fox Kids the episode orders, but they didn't have any control of how Fox Kid broadcasted the episodes. So there's 2 different ways to watch the show, and how they broadcast it, which makes no sense, and how the episode order should be. We watched it in how the episodes should be watched.
Yep.
Which I do think they could have, even how they made the episodes, I do think they could have saved Monster Wars for the very last 3 episodes. But anyway, the broadcasting is because there's something called sweep weeks in television in November, February, and May. Television has to put out their best in order to bring in advertising money.
At those times,
because they're up for renewal for how much money they can get. So Fox Kids needs more money for advertising to keep these shows going and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So at this point, they thought it would be a great time to air Monster Wars, which is... So Monster Wars is usually episode like 15, 16, and 17.
Yep.
But broadcasted at episode 12, 13, and 14.
Makes so much sense.
If you're watching in order, it flows perfectly.
Yep.
And the build up to Monster Wars is there, but they had to move up Monster Wars because they needed to broadcast like, oh, don't miss the exciting 3-part event, Godzilla Monster Wars. You know, they had to do all that kind of stuff for the middle of November and move up dates. So stuff that happens after the fact when they aired it didn't make much sense. But as kids, you don't really think about that.
No.
They're either, because at that point after Monster Wars, they would throw a couple reruns on and then start airing more episodes because they had to spread out their time. But yeah, that's why their broadcasting and actual episode order are different.
That makes so much sense, because I was reading the descriptions and watching the episode and I thought, this is not right.
Yeah.
And I'd skip through, and then I ended up, I guess, watching it. I caught on to it and I corrected it.
Because I sent you the order as well after the fact. You're like, why is it so different? Because there's an episode called Talkin' Trash.
Yeah.
Is episode 3 in order, but it was like it was like episode 5 in broadcasting, which makes no sense.
No.
Broadcasting is such a big part of the show. And when the show finished, season 2 was ready to go because they had the 40 episodes.
Yep.
But between season 1 and 2, they took a big break airing the show, which is why I never watched season 2.
Oh, okay.
And it's because of Pokemon.
Pokemon
was so big at the time, Fox Kids had to do everything in their power to battle the Pokemon Wars. So that's what they called it back in the day, was Pokemon Wars. Pokemon had taken over. So Fox Kids had to fight them with Digimon.
Yep.
And they also had to fight him with Monster Rancher.
Jeez.
So Godzilla had to take a step back. So by the time it came back, it was maybe 6 months later. And so they kicked it off for like, how do we kick off season 2?
Yeah.
So instead of putting like Future Shock was episode 17 of season 2, but it was episode 1 of season 2 for broadcasting.
Jeez.
And for me, I think Future Shock, once we talk about the episodes, I think it should have been 2 parts.
Yes.
And that's how they should have ended season 2.
I agree. I felt like the end of season 2 did not, there was nothing much going on.
Because they were hoping for, they left it open-ended because there's no ending to the show. I think that's also a negative to the show, is there's no ending.
Yep.
Season 2 felt like there was nothing happening.
Yeah.
Compared to season 1, where they were leading to the big Monster Island brawl.
Exactly.
Where season 2 was just kind of, let's just make episodes. So I think they were hoping for someday they might be able to make more episodes. They didn't want to close it off. But when you knew you had 40 episodes, I think as a writer, I would have planned for season 1 to be all about Monster Island, and then have season 2. One episode I loved in season 2 was, it was like episode 3 or 4, where they were doing the reporter episode on Monster Island.
Oh, the flashback.
The flashback. It wasn't even a flashback. It was like a documentary.
It was her documentary. Yes.
Yeah, I think they should have. I know they wanted to do Future Shock as the moment, but I think that should have been season 2, episode 1.
It was a good episode. I enjoyed it.
It was so cool. I understand why it'd be boring for kids. As a story perspective, that should follow Monster Island immediately.
Right.
Because after Monster Island, you had 2 episodes of season 1 to finish it. Yes. And then you could go on after the hiatus and come back with, here's what's been happening.
Exactly. Yeah. I was just thinking that. That makes so much sense.
And the animation in the first 2 minutes, spectacular on that documentary show. Yep. The way Godzilla was drawn, and the way, first, let me just say this. As much as I love the Toho Godzilla, this is one of my favorite Godzilla designs, hands down.
The drawn version.
Yes.
Yeah.
The movie version's fine, but the drawn version of him in this show makes him so cool.
It is
the
cool.
Spikes, the green fire, how agile he is, the way he digs around, the way he fights. It's so cool.
Yep.
It's one of my favorite forms of Godzilla. And I know everybody hates Zilla, is what they call him. But this show, he is Godzilla in the show.
Yeah, and because it does have that brawl aspect. Godzilla's going to fight a monster. He's got to be a little swift, got to be smaller, compact. Intelligent. Yeah. And that the lizardy aspect of him kind of lends into that. The flattened head, the sharp nose. Yeah. It's a cool design.
Yeah. And I think if they would have had more episodes, they could have probably finished it off. But the reason they didn't have more episodes is because there was no merchandise.
Yeah.
They had merchandise planned. They had toys, they had t-shirts, everything for this show. But because Godzilla, the movie, failed in merchandising, they didn't sell toys. They barely sold the merch. I had the toys, but like it was a failure in terms of that. They canceled all the toys for the show. Wow. And it's such a disappointment because it would have made Godzilla so big.
Probably.
The toys for this cartoon.
Well, 60 monsters.
Yeah.
That's a lot of sets.
Yeah. All the characters. They didn't even have to do all the monsters. They could have just done season 1. Right. Like you had Godzilla as the toy.
Yep.
You know, you had the other main monsters from season 1. You had all the main characters. They could have done the Heat Seeker. That'd have been cool.
Yep. I was thinking like the worm. Didn't they have like an armadillo or something? I can't remember.
Then they had the basilisk with the Mecha Kong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then they had the boars from the Freeze episode in Antarctica. They had the boars for that. They had the rats. The episode where he was hunting them in the city, which was really cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Those are freaky.
But yeah, let's dive in. I don't want to talk about every episode. I just want to get points, but I just want to ask you what your favorite episodes. I can't say favorite episode because that's gonna be hard. But there's, I guarantee you, there's a couple episodes that were your absolute favorite.
Oh, I loved the what was it called with the aliens?
Okay, so there's episode when they first introduced, it's called Leviathan.
Yes,
and they find the ship at the bottom of the ocean. Yes. I love that episode.
That is an awesome episode because that was the first time I was like, I thought, oh, there's a connected story here. Mm-hmm. Because the two like henchmen guys, their eyes changed
at the end.
Yeah. I thought, oh, sweet. Like, I'm looking forward to this now.
And then there was a couple episodes in between that until Monster Wars.
Monster Wars.
Which was a 3-part season finale-ish.
Yes.
Bringing it all together.
Yep. I thought that was my favorite because usually when we watch shows like this, I'm looking for those connected episodes. Mm-hmm. Well, like we did with Gargoyles and Spider-Man.
Technically, those 3 episodes connected all the first 12 episodes because you saw monsters from every episode that you saw show up on Monster Island.
Exactly.
So it made all those episodes worthwhile.
Absolutely. Which you don't usually see. You usually see those 3-4 episodes isolated. They all tie together nicely. But it was literally the whole season. All the monsters, they're on the island.
Yeah. Or trying to bring them to the island.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I would say that was my favorite, mainly because it was a strong story and it tied everything together for that season. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think season 2 for me fizzled out a little bit because
we didn't have that to lead to.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
When it comes to the alien plotline, they're all about harboring Earth and kind of transforming into a planet for them.
Yes.
So that's why they want to send a signal to control the monsters in order to make sure that everybody gets wiped out and they can now take over the planet, which is a cool idea in itself. And the aliens looked cool. I like the transformation of the humans into the aliens, those two guys, and how they all have like the hive mind, basically.
Yes.
They're all connected. And you get introduced to 2 more, or another monster in Monster Wars Part 1, which is the Bat. I thought the Bat was cool. And then you get Dreadlock coming back.
Yes.
Which is one of the episodes previous where it's not the Loch Ness Monster, but it's the Leviathan episode where you see 2 of these monsters fighting Godzilla at the bottom of the ocean. They come back. And the episode before, I don't know if it's the episode right before, but if you watch it in order how it's supposed to be, there's an episode called Competition, which is the snake and Mecha Kong and Godzilla goes to Japan with the woman scientist making the Mecha Kong.
Yes,
and then fighting the basilisk snake with the venom.
It has Godzilla like the frills.
Up. Yeah, it's so cool.
That was a cool episode.
Yeah. And what's funny about it, I wrote it down. I don't know if you caught it, but it was a nice little fourth wall break. At the beginning of the episode, the crew's traveling to Japan, and we're on a plane. And one of the kids in the plane is sitting next to his mother, and he looks out the window, and he's like, "Mom, Godzilla! I could see Godzilla." And she's like, "What would Gojira be doing in Japan?"
Love it. That's so good.
Yeah, so it was a nice little tease because it's American version, so what would he be doing? But it was so cool seeing Godzilla in Japan in this show. And it was nice touch that every episode they were in a different part of the world.
Yes.
Which made it fresh.
Yep.
But yeah, this episode, it was like a 3-part. It was getting you ready for Monster Wars is what this was doing.
For sure.
3 all-out brawl. And then because the ape, he was coated in fur. He almost looked like a Bigfoot, like a white Yeti. Yeah. And then they stripped him down. Godzilla burnt him to a crisp, and then he was all robotic. We find out the scientist was making this Kong, it's a tie into one of the monsters from the 60s. I didn't watch all the Showa era, so I don't really know what this monster was, but I watched a video and someone referenced it was like a direct reference to this monster.
Oh, okay.
This robot. So they had this, and the snake fighting was cool. The animation's just top notch for when they bring him in.
Yes.
Anytime Godzilla shows up, they're just like, yeah, let's get the budget going.
Yeah, it like I said before, it's very consistent, and there was nothing janky about that show.
No,
colors were good, animation was always solid. And I didn't see a lot of repeated frames of anything.
Yeah, it was basically all. There was maybe like 1 or 2 with the humans,
right?
But like everything was brand new every episode.
Yeah, which is
except
impressive.
For maybe like a couple shots of Godzilla swimming in the water.
Yes,
there might have been a couple of those, but the animation, the backgrounds are all painted on cells.
That's so cool.
So it allowed for greater contrasts, more depth in the backgrounds.
Yes,
more defined colors. So that's why the show looks so cool.
I always thought that those episodes when they were in like the Amazon, the ones where they did it in Mexico near that volcano with the Quetzalcoatl. That Firebird thing.
Yeah.
I thought it all looked so good. It was very vibrant.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Monster Wars and Competition are definitely the top episodes, but there's a couple other ones that are solid as well. But I want to point out in episode 2 of Monster Wars, I know it's for kids, but as someone watching it myself, I wish they didn't put this line in because it spoiled the surprise of Mecha Godzilla.
What did they say?
Nick says they get to this place where the army is, and he says, "Oh, this is where they studied and preserved the first Godzilla." And immediately I'm like, okay, he's in here.
Yeah.
You know, if they would have not put that line in, seeing Cyborgzilla from the first movie, because they open the show, the first episode opens with a slight recap of the movie where Godzilla dies on the bridge.
Yep.
And everything that happens. So we get the first Godzilla we saw remade as a cyborg.
Yes.
And if they didn't put that line in there, that would have been the coolest reveal of all time.
It would have been. That I would have liked that too. That would have been another very good action figure.
It would have. And then they end that episode on episode 2 where our Godzilla shows up.
Yeah.
And then Nick and Craven are making a joke. It's like, well, who's he going to listen to? Because that's his birth mother right there.
Right.
And then she roars, but she also has the tech from the aliens in her. So she's mind controlled like a cyborg.
Yeah.
So they're using her as a beacon they're using a satellite to control all these monsters, but they're using Mechagodzilla as a beacon to send the signal to Godzilla out. To control Godzilla.
Yep.
And then at that point, Godzilla changes sides and it's all out war. One of the coolest scenes, I think, in Monster Wars when they send all the monsters to different parts of the world.
Yes. Yes.
And they're like destroying it. Godzilla shows up to Washington. The animation's so cool. And he stomps into the White House and he roars in front of Lincoln. The statue.
That was a great shot.
Yeah, man.
I love that.
And then Cyborgzilla is in Japan or Tokyo.
That's right. That's
so
right.
Cool. So cool. They did such a great job with this show. And I don't know there's an episode I've seen millions of times called Talking Trash. It's with the microbes. The scientist makes the microbes. And it's the red monster that absorbs all the trash.
Yes.
And there's a frame in there. I caught it immediately. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it takes the shape of Biollante as the flower. It's one still frame. Godzilla's looking up at it, and it's like this long tower, and it has like the flower head on top.
Yeah.
It's one frame. I was like, that's a cool little nod if that's what they were trying to do.
I think that's what they were doing. I remember that.
Yeah. I was like, I have to write that down.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most, I think that's one of the episodes that they put on repeat a lot because I remember watching it like maybe 20 times as a kid because I feel like that's one of the episodes I've seen the most. The whole time as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh yeah, the microbes. They're talking about the microbes.
Yeah.
They say microbes so many times. Oh, you got the hack for those microbes?
Right.
Craven, I'm gonna need that for the microbes.
So good.
Randy, I'm gonna need it. Microbes.
Yeah.
Gotta get the microbes. But like again, that's stuff making kids remember what it is, right? It's
exactly.
Just dialogue to make us keep up with what's going on.
Yeah.
Because it was a great animated episode, like how they animated Godzilla.
Yeah.
How all the monsters that he's fighting, every fight was different.
Mm-hmm.
And the other episode, I think you said you might have watched as a kid, was the one with the queen bee in the forest.
Yeah. For some reason, that one just stuck in my head.
I've seen that one so many times too. That one's cool as well.
Yep.
But then there's one episode I didn't watch growing up, and it's the Juggernaut episode. After Monster Wars, so you have Early Frost, where there's a chameleon that was made by Winters to look like Godzilla on the bottom.
Yes.
So they think Godzilla's terrorizing New York again. But this one, this monster is like an amoeba that forms into like a giant trash goop brain.
I'm going to look it up.
It's not a great episode, but there's a point in the episode where Godzilla shows up. And this is the only thing I wrote down. Godzilla entrance, climbing over the building beams. Like it was one of the coolest ways I saw Godzilla show up in this show other than coming out of the water. Because like he was like crawling over top of this and is like ready to destroy this menace.
Yes.
And I was like, man, the animation on that was so cool.
I remember
Despite me not liking the episode, I have to write that down because it was awesome.
That is a weird creature.
Yeah. Also, the next episode, the Ballad of Jendu Maris.
I love that episode.
It was so good, but I don't know if you caught it. Randy was talking about AI art, and it's going to take over the future or something.
Yes,
because he
was making the logo, right?
Yeah,
that was so funny. I loved that. Yes, yeah, I like that episode a lot.
Yeah. And there was one of the last episodes of season 1. Again, I think there was too many episodes after Monster Wars. There was like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But there was one long, strange trip. So to me, this was us getting a Magic School Bus episode in Godzilla. Is when Godzilla was being attacked by like a disease, like it was an amoeba.
Oh yeah,
breaking him down on the inside, and they had to go inside of him. And
yes,
it was
because he went into his little underwater cave.
Yeah. And they like went inside of him and tried to like kill the amoeba that was causing him from healing.
Yes.
Right. It was like, man, this is a Magic School Bus.
Because that was Nick and Monique went in.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a cool episode.
It was a cool episode. I really enjoyed that one. It was like a different take to like the humans being purposeful.
Yes.
100%.
They're not
Godzilla as much as a part of their team as they are to him. Like they mean as much.
Yep. No, that was a cool episode. I like that one.
Yeah.
For sure.
But then we get into season 2, and I just think you can stop at season 1.
Honestly, yeah.
As good as like some of the episodes are good, like the animation doesn't dip or anything. But I just don't. There's no story.
The fact that it doesn't end and there's no continuous story. Yeah, you could stop at 1. You would get the picture, and you wouldn't feel like you're missing anything.
Yeah. Because there's points like we talked about with the documentary episode. That was a great episode.
Yep.
The animation was killer. The style of it was new and different. It was talking about what we knew about season 1. It was bringing stuff back from season 1. But I feel like the rest of the episodes didn't really tie in season 1 that much.
Well, because
it was just one-offs.
The other thing, too, the relationship between Nick and the reporter, I forget
Monique.
her name.
Not Monique, sorry. Audrey.
Audrey. That had a big component in that episode.
Yeah.
Because this was when she kind of realized this is what I want to do. Or she, this was a big thing. It almost destroyed their relationship. And then she realized, I'm going to chuck this masterpiece essentially of hers for the sake of the relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, cool. Like some development. And then everything after that, I think they kept saying, yeah, I got to go to work now. I got to go too. And that was it. There's no other, the characters didn't develop. They didn't change much.
No, because there was so much character development in season 1. The only thing in season 2 was Elsie and Craven.
Yes.
When they finally realized that they were made for each other kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Especially after the Future Shock episode.
Yep.
Which would make no sense to viewers if that was episode 1. Because it was like episode 17 that her realizing he means so much to her after seeing him in the future and then coming back to see him in the past.
Right.
Yeah. And then there was the finale, I guess, was Area 51.
Oh, yeah.
Where they it was cool because they had like this massive dome in Area 51 where these rich people brought people in to watch monsters fight.
Yes.
So it was kind of cool, but it ended. That was the finale, but it was just open-ended. Yeah,
there were probably 5 or 6 solid episodes that had some arc to it from the previous season, but that was it. It would have been cool to maybe extend that Area 51 thing a little bit.
Yeah.
And have like one season, have it be 25 or 26 episodes, and then you're done.
Because I do think Monster Island kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
Like the monsters on the island that were being studied during the documentary.
Yeah.
You didn't really see them after that.
No.
So I think I think they could have planned season 2 a little better. But then again, they were given 40 episodes. Planning an animated show was a lot of work.
It for sure.
And trying to write, I think they also didn't want the problem with shows like this. As much as we had Monster Wars, they did want it to be episode of the week, like you said. So you didn't have to follow.
Exactly.
We needed just like that's why I think Future Shock should have been 2 episodes. And here's another thing I wanted as I was watching it. The scientists in Future Shock should have been the same scientist from the Talking Trash.
Episode,
where he was making the microbes. Because I think taking him from there and having him come back, kind of like how Cameron Winters came and gone.
Yep.
But having him come back for that, being the reason why Godzilla would die in the future,
right,
would be such a cool. You could have had a little flashback of like him making the microbes, like him developing that into what these creatures are.
Exactly.
So I think you could have done a whole episode in the future, and then cut it to be continued when they were coming back to the past.
Yeah.
So the second part of it would have been them trying to find the scientist to defeat him and make sure Godzilla stays and that this doesn't happen and end the world.
Exactly.
I think they could have ended the whole season like that.
I think so too. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
I like that.
And they could have ended it on a lifting note that Godzilla is the savior of Earth and that we need him around.
Exactly.
Rather than just ending the show.
Well, because really the whole show is essentially about the preservation of nature and life.
Yeah.
And Godzilla is part of that. So that would have been a cool way to finish it, really.
Because that's what Monster Island is for, right? To keep those monsters alive, study them, but not let them destroy.
Contained, yeah.
Overall, it was a great
fun show.
It's a fun show.